A warm and fuzzy hello, welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Eaps Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you. We're going to be joined here in a few minutes by one of our good friends, Colby Dant. He does an incredible job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. He is dialed into everything that we're seeing in college basketball. We're going to be chatting about quite a few different things with him today. We're going to be talking about the fact that he was over at ACC Media Days, and there were a few teams and a few coaches that talked about their teams, feeling pretty confident about them. We're going to be diving in on those sorts of teams. We're also going to be talking about the importance of now taking a look at some of these international players with regards to how they might be impacting this season as well. There are a lot of international players that are going to be impacting the ACC schools, so we're going to be talking very much about that, and we're also going to be chatting with Colby about just a few teams in general that he's feeling bullish/bearish on, and we need to get his thoughts on these exhibition matchups. Do we make a lot out of them? Do we make a little bit out of them? Do we make absolutely nothing whatsoever out of them? Because I do think that there's a lot of different thoughts on that, so we're going to have an amazing chat with Colby here today. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, whatever for this podcast, you have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, LRCM, the email does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever. With EdgeBoost, 100% of gambling transactions do get approved. You get cashback rewards as you utilize EdgeBoost as well. And when you go to EdgeBoost.bet, make sure you put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That'll get you a $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's have ourselves a good old time and chat with one of our good friends at Colby. He does an amazing job over at the College Experience on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Our good friend Ryan McIntyre, who he co-hosts with, he joins this podcast quite a bit. He also lends amazing insights. You're able to follow our good friend Colby on the old Twitter/X at the Colby D altogether. And Colby, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, buddy. We are getting close, man. Day by day, crossing the days off the calendar. You know, for us, I feel like, Greg, only a select few that really appreciate every college basketball game we get. Your lay fan is happy when it's like championship week or March Madness. I love this year. It's November 3rd, but they've moved that thing around. I know we were fast friends when we first met, just because we watch any college basketball game under the face of the sun. So I can't wait for the season to start.
Oh, absolutely. And sometimes with these shows/podcasts, you always want to be a fly on the wall. And sometimes the best conversations are the ones that you have off air. And you were mentioning this to me. You were out there in the great state of North Carolina for ACC Media Days, and we talked about this a few weeks ago. Sometimes there are some coaches that you can gain a little bit of something from their off-season, shall we say, pressers, their media day conversations, what have you, and there are some guys that they're about as plain as a saltine cracker without the salt. There are those guys out there as well, but there were a few from ACC Media Days that really stood out to you, so I'll give you the floor on this. Just what stood out to you and the team in particular that maybe has you changing your tune just a little bit.
Yeah, to hit on the point you were saying, like there's coaches that I feel like you just press play, and you know, we jokingly will say like a car salesman or something. But there's a reality to that where you can't take much from it, because this doesn't mean they're bad basketball coaches. It just means it's almost like they've been in the industry so long, and somewhat of their personality knows when to press play. And this goes for football, basketball. It doesn't make a difference in sport, where they could press play and it's like, man, I don't know what to deduce from this. This guy's team could be terrible. It could be awesome. But there are nuggets that I think you can gain from media days. And the one that got me, I had done my preview for the ACC prior. There was two actually that I think I re-examined a little more closely since then. Virginia Tech being the one that I feel like I learned, perhaps I am way off on my judgment, talking to Coach Young, Mike Young. You know, it was a pivotal year for him, I think, with the athletic department kind of, you know, they're throwing a bunch of money in. It's a big year. You got a 5-star recruit to come to Blacksburg from Greece coming in. And I was shocked how confident he was in his team. And he doesn't strike me, talking to him the whole day or, you know, for an hour or two, just hearing him speak and then going to talk with him personally. He does not strike me as someone that kind of gasses you up. He's kind of what you see is what you get. And that's why I was pretty taken back by how confident he was in his team. He told me himself that if we stay healthy, always a coach's worst nightmare when your team's not healthy. But he said, this is a team that will be in the NCAA tournament if we stay healthy. He loved his point guard play. That was a thing that, really, I had him projected much further back. The way he was talking was to be like, yes, this team is better. Their length is better. They're better athletically. They're better at shooting. They're better at this. And pretty much it seemed like everything. He was very confident about his team coming into the basketball season, which has me reevaluating. Another one I'll say that kind of was like that for me was Jai Lucas in Miami. Like Miami, I know his personality seemed kind of low key, kind of humbled, but he seemed pretty confident. He said, I pinpointed all the players I want that we wanted to get in the offseason when I came in. And another thing I was not aware of is that his dad had coached with Jimmy Larinaga back in the day. So Jimmy Larinaga's been at a bunch of his practices down there in South Beach. Says he's got an open invitation and he comes a couple times a week. That makes me feel a little bit better about Miami, believe it or not. So those are two ones where I really took away something. The rest, no disrespect to these coaches, but I felt like some of the other coaches were definitely press and play. And just like, I don't know what to do from this. Pat Kelsey's confident in his team, but I feel like I just couldn't get a read on, everything was great. Everything we're great. And it's like, okay. Whereas Mike Young told me with confidence, he thought his team was better, but he also told me like, not the best shooting team I've had, but we're the toughest team we've had. It's just stuff like that where they show the vulnerability of their teams, but also can highlight why they think this team is very good and very confidently say like, we will be in the mix. So I would say Virginia Tech being number one, Miami being kind of one where I feel a little bit better about the roster, knowing what I know now than I did prior. Now, that doesn't mean that they'll be a tournament team. I just think maybe I'll move them up a couple spots.
And just to add a little bit of context to what you were talking about with Jai Lucas and his father being at practices with Jim Larinaga, what have you. His father is John Lucas II. Yes, the man that was playing in the NBA for many, many years and was a part of that great Maryland team way back in the day. So a little bit of context there, as we do have Colby Dant, who does such great work over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And I thought that it was interesting because you were talking about how Virginia Tech and you heard Mike Young and you felt so confident. And then they dropped that exhibition game to Seton Hall a few days ago, which Seton Hall I don't think is going to be very good this year. And that was just rough to say the least. But how much do you put into these exhibition results? Because I'm sure that there will be a lot of people thinking, Virginia Tech is going to stink. They lost to Seton Hall in this exhibition matchup. Heck, there was a made-up exhibition matchup where there were people trying to drum up the fact that LaSalle had knocked off, I forget who it was. I think it was Rutgers or something like that, but it was a secret scrimmage result that never actually happened. So there was a reason why it was a secret, because it never actually came to fruition. So that was fun there. But what do you make out of these results? Because I do think that a lot of people will just see the final score and make way too much out of it rather than looking at how the individual players perform.
Yeah, it's hard to really take that in, and give it validity, because a perfect example would be, and I know years past when I've been at media days or something and I've talked to coaches about stuff, I know sometimes they just want to experience, hey, let's try the small ball lineup out. Let's try doing this. Let's see if we can do the point forward thing. Let's try this zone on defense. Let's see the depth of our team. Let's get them major minutes. So it's really hard to deduce something very substantial. Like you mentioned Seton Hall beating Virginia Tech. It was funny. I saw that and I'm like, wow, okay. So he gives me this thing and then they lose to Seton Hall, who I have projected pretty far back in the Big East. But then I'm like, don't overthink it. This is preseason. You saw Oklahoma State beat Auburn, right? I can't confidently say that would happen if they played in 2 weeks. So if anything, I think Auburn, Vegas would set the odds at Auburn as a pretty decent favorite. I guess it's a little bit like maybe I'm buying into that Seton Hall might be a little bit better than I think. So maybe it has a little bit of an impact on the way I feel about the teams that are winning. Maybe that's a good sign to see perhaps, but I would say like 10% weight into those things. The teams that lose, not really. Cause I tend to think sometimes you're just exploring your roster. You're exploring different tactics that you might use, different methods. to get ready for the season.
Yep, I'm right there with you, and I think that that's a big thing to be doing, and I think that this is a nice stopping point for part number 1 of our conversation, and in part 2, I want to talk to Colby about how much he might be looking a little bit more at the individual players rather than the actual final score with regards to these exhibitions. We're going to talk with him in terms of individual players as well, just on the impact that these international players that are coming over are having on the game as well, and we're going to try to get a little bit of thought as to some of the teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on as well. Colby's such a wealth of information, and he'll be joining me back on the flip side right here on Just Because with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beats Family Podcast. Here in lovely Las Vegas for Cusco Soups with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VC Family Podcast. We're being rejoined by Colby Dant. He does an incredible job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, looking at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know that he is hard at work, much like myself, getting set for what is going to be an incredible college basketball season. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at the Colby D. And Colby, when we left off in the previous segment, we were talking about these exhibition matchups, and I want to go a little bit further on that. How much do you want to take a look at more or less the player rotation, some of the guys that are able to flourish, because those are the things I really look at in the exhibition matchups. I don't really look at the final score. I don't look at, this team with this team or what have you, because we have seen so many phony baloney secret scrimmage results in the past that it's not even funny, but I do think that coaches sometimes tip their hands as to guys that they want to see maybe a little bit more from, and maybe they're trying to see if a guy is able to flourish in a little bit of a, shall we say, elevated role, get him a few more shots.
No, that's a great point. Especially, another thing I probably should have led in with the ACC Media Days, and I'm sure you've covered this, but I guess it was my first time grasping it all in, was how many, that rule change with the European players and the fact that you can go get these pro players into college now. It seems like when I was at the ACC Media Days going through each roster, now I had done my preview before, but I guess some of the names I just thought, okay, they'll be deep on the bench. When I got breakdowns from a lot of these coaches of like, no, they played major minutes in this league and this guy will be a strong contributor. That is something that I think maybe we are underestimating coming into the college basketball season here. I mean, I had a couple different coaches telling me they're going to be setting up pipelines, essentially trying to get into the European market as far as the players. Now that this rule by the NCAA, meaning that before you could not play pro ball in Europe, but now you are eligible. So these teams, I actually think it's going to really strengthen the college basketball sport as far as the quality of play. I was surprised by how many of them, and I guess I didn't factor in how many. It seemed like each team almost in the ACC has 1 to 2 players from Europe coming in. Not to say that some of them aren't true freshmen that never played pro ball in Europe, but a lot of them definitely did, because each coach was telling me about this. And certain coaches, had experience playing overseas when they got done with college ball. So they were already kind of tapped into certain coaches over there. That's another thing you can learn from these games, these early season matchups. Potentially, these are better players than we realize. What'd you think? Have you really highlighted this, Greg? Because on our show, I don't think I emphasized it enough until I went to ACC Media Days, and I was like, whoa. I know I'm going to be at Mountain West Media Days next week, and I kind of expect the same there. But this is something that I think could be just a gigantic thing for the sport.
And ironically enough, I talked about this a few days ago with one of my good friends, Kevin Sweeney, because he does a show with Eric Fawcett. He's a man that I believe is out there in the country of Canada. They do a nice show over at Basket Under Review. So with Eric, he's very much tied into the international game. And the way that Kevin was describing it to me is when it comes to taking a look at these international guys, they're just like taking a look at some of these high school guys and taking a look at some of these college guys, like scoring 15 points per game, for example, at one of the highest levels in Europe is much different than scoring 15 points per game at one of the lower levels in Europe. And I think that that's something big to be taking a look at as well, because I know that you were talking about these international guys, and I don't think that just taking a look at the raw stats is necessarily where they're becoming equal. And we as college basketball bettors and college basketball handicappers now actually need to know a little bit of the lay of the land with regards to these European leagues, because the way that you put up numbers and maybe a guy being glued on the bench at like a top-end European team like the Olympiacos or something like that, that's actually a big deal.
I feel like me, you, a bunch of other colleagues that cover the sport, we know, a guy coming out of the math or a guy coming in, we're like, okay, pay attention to this, or, Oak Hill or something, or whatever high school that we know has a track record. This is different. First off, we have to educate ourselves about all this. around all of Europe and really, I guess, the whole world. The fact you can get a 24-year-old to be a freshman, that makes the game pretty wild, man. Maybe I'm overemphasizing it. We haven't seen a season play out like this, but like my thought was, I was like, whoa, this is like major news. This can really change the game. You can really cut corners. And honestly, I don't know if the ACC had a coaches meeting behind the door. Like, I felt like the ACC had a terrible year last year. I think you would admit that, right? Like, there was not the ACC we knew growing up. I don't know if they had a meeting where the coaches were like, hey, we got to get this European market, or if the commissioner, Jim Phillips, was saying that. But I got the gist that a lot of these teams were over there getting, and really I kind of got the gist of the panic of like, we need to improve fast. Here's an option. We are closest to Europe right here. I know, I mean, obviously Gonzaga and Arizona, Tommy Lloyd and stuff, and all these schools have been, there's a select few schools that have been going to Europe for a while, but I got the feeling like this was a coordinated plan almost. And it makes me kind of even more fascinated to watch this pending college basketball season that we got going, because I wonder the impact. I wonder if some of it is coach speak, or if these guys are really that good. If this league, you know, some of the stats you see, like, I don't know these leagues that well. So like some of the stats you see where this guy averaged 25 points a game over there, you're like, whoa, okay. Is this league good? Is it credible? How will it translate to college basketball? The sport's a lot different, even though it's still basketball. But that was one of the bigger takeaways. I think this has potential to be one of the biggest things that's happened to college basketball really since like the one and dones.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well. And I think that's really interesting just to dive in on the ACC, as Colby Dant, who does an amazing job over at the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, joins me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, because you were mentioning Virginia Tech at the start. They brought Nicolas Avadelis. That's the main guy that you were talking about, the 6'8", little bit of a unicorn guy out there. But I really feel like the ACC had a great offseason. And do I think that they're going to be right on par with the SEC and the Big 12 once again this year? I think that would be wild to speculate. But you mentioned the international guys, along with a few home run hires, in my opinion, bringing on for NC State a guy in Will Wade that made the NCAA tournament. Ryan Odom, we all know about his work. You mentioned Jai Lucas going on over to Miami. I feel like the ACC, just under the radar, has had a nice offseason, mainly because they brought in a few coaches that are rock solid, but maybe other than Will Wade, they don't necessarily create the splash that some of the other guys do. And you mentioned these international guys. They're what I like to call out of sight, out of mind guys. And just because you didn't see them at the high school level, just because they weren't putting up 15 points per game at the mid-major ranks, doesn't mean that they're not rock solid. And I feel like this could be this year's coming out party for them, and they might come out of nowhere and get way more bids to the NCAA tournament than expected, especially if a team like Syracuse, Virginia Tech, Notre Dame, those sort of mid-tier teams end up surprising in non-conference play.
100%. I've done the media days things for a few years now, you know, like 4 or 5 different years. I felt an urgency this time. I can't say the same last year. I felt an urgency, and maybe that's just the pending change of college athletics, where you're these teams, I think, realizing that they could get left behind. In a way, I think it's incredibly healthy to their athletic departments, even though I think you would probably agree with me that I think it's silly that Rutgers and UCLA are in the same conference or whatever, or Stanford and Cal are in the ACC. But I felt an urgency, like it was a point of emphasis for them. And the more I talked to the coaches, and sometimes I wasn't even trying to bring that into the conversation, but they brought it in the conversation. So I felt a legit urgency that they have to take care of the non-con. They cut down that's another thing. They cut down their conference schedule to 18 games. Like Micah Shrewsbury told me he was able to add that game at TCU, I think it is, or maybe it's a neutral down there really close to TCU in Dallas, because of them cutting down the schedule. But they basically, I can't compare it to football either. Like football, maybe a tiny bit, I felt a little bit of urgency, but I felt like, no, we're changing. We're throwing money in here. We will be very good in basketball. I felt like some of the programs that traditionally would just say, yeah, they seem to be very concentrated on winning. A lot of these schools, a lot of these coaches, perhaps more. I know that sounds silly because you're like, well, you interview all these coaches. Of course, they're going to be optimistic about their season. They don't want to say anything negative. But I actually felt like you got some negative of like, no, we need to. This is something that we need to win these non-con games. Keep bringing up Mike Young, but he was one that really emphasized. I think they play South Carolina. He's like, that's a gigantic game that we have to win this year. And it's not just for Virginia Tech. It's for our whole conference. I felt it, man. I'm curious to see how this works. But yes, the conference got way better from a coaching standpoint. We think, I mean, they had a lot of dinosaurs. The ACC, you know, as much as I grew up loving the ACC. So they had obviously Coach K, Roy Williams. Like it was kind of a changing with the guard, Leonard Hamilton. Larinaga. Louisville was terrible for a little bit there after the Patino stuff, and really the Mac thing was ugly too. But they seem to have gotten out of like most of these schools. I don't know how Luke's going to do at Florida State. I don't know if Lucas is the answer at Miami, but I tend to think they kind of know what's going on in college athletics a little more than their predecessors. And I think that urgency was seen firsthand when you went to talk to these coaches.
Absolutely. And I do think that it's going to be a really interesting year out there in the ACC. Colby, you were out there in the Carolinas for ACC Media Days, and I know you're going to be out in the Carolinas for opening day of college basketball, which, as we're recording this, less than 2.5 weeks away. I know you're going to be attending pretty much the first game of the college basketball season out there in the great state of South Carolina. I know you're hard at work getting set with all these conference previews with another one of our good friends, Ryan McIntyre, and along the way, you're doing some great college football analysis as well. So, love the good people at home, know it's all on tap for you, and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Thank you, Greg. Yeah, I'm at the Colby D on Twitter. My show is the College Basketball Experience on Twitter at TCE on SGPN, but YouTube is our big following, youtube.com/the College Experience, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get that. I think we're getting Winthrop, Queens, St. Bonaventure, Bradley, High Point, Furman. That is the opening day in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And then we're carrying that over to Charlotte the second day, where we get to see the Texas Longhorns against this Duke team with the Boozer brothers. I can't wait, man. I can't wait, and excited to be there. And let's go, man. Best time of year coming.
It is the best time of year. We're getting the sports equinox here in the next few days. And then after that, we get the start of the college basketball season. Colby, he's got his finger on the pulse of a little bit of everything. And every single time he joins me, he lends such amazing insight. So big thanks, Colby, for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larsium, maybe it does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. Then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. We are up over 2,150 straight days without a missed podcast, so the consistency is definitely there. We're just a little bit over 2 weeks away from the start of the college basketball season, and now you've got a conference preview for all 31 conferences. If you miss any of those, if you look wherever you're getting your podcasts, they're all down the list there. Every single conference does have a specialized conference preview edition for them, so I'm glad that I was able to get that all squared away, and I'll be back with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.